Well, today we're going to talk about tense. It's going to all make sense. You'll have a sense of how to use tense, so let's commence. Tense determines the form of the verb, but don't get ahead of yourself. Some forms don't indicate tense, like participles, which indicate aspect, and infinitives, which sometimes are tricky homonyms. Does that make sense, or is that a little intense?
You may think there are three forms of tense: past, present, and future. But not so fast. That's nonsense. There are only two forms of tense. Future is expressed in the present tense or with modal auxiliaries. Does that make sense? Let us give you an example. In the sentence, I ate a seafood hoagie, the subject is I. Following the subject comes the most important part, where the tense lives. Does that make sense? So the word ate is what is expressing the past tense. But let's look at this sentence. I will be eating a seafood hoagie tomorrow. Now what comes directly after I? The tense. Does that make sense? See, the future is phony. Will is a modal auxiliary just like can, might, and should. These thieving modals steal the tense, just like the other auxiliaries like have, be, and the pleonastic do. And there can only be one tensed verb in a sentence. Be is in the infinitive form because it follows a modal. This is always the case. And eating is a present participle. So will is a modal auxiliary expressing the present tense, making the main verb status present progressive conditional, but that's way too intense. Let's stick with tense. Let's take a look at the sentence, I have talked to you about tense. Now let's compare that to, I talked to you about tense. The word talked is spelled and pronounced the same in its past participle and past tense form. That's called a homonym. What about these sentences? I talk a lot about tense, and I will talk some more about tense. These two forms of talk, the present tense and the infinitive, are identical, but they are not in the same form. Look at the verb be as an illustration. What are its forms? Be is its infinitive. Is, are, and am are its present tenses. Was and were are its past tenses. Being is its present participle, and been is its past participle. Most importantly, none of these forms are homonyms of each other. So we know that there are 5 distinct forms of each verb, whether they look and sound the same or not. And infinitives and participles do not express tense. Does that make sense?
Now this salty hoagie needs a companion. A drink of some sort. Lemonade. Oh darn, I dropped my glass of lemonade and it broke. If you drop a glass, it breaks. But why doesn't it brokes? That doesn't make sense. Brokes isn't a word. The original word break goes through an internal change, meaning the main vowel sound changes in the verb's different forms. Other verbs that go through the internal change are take and took, drink and drank, came and come, and meet and met. But that's only one way to form the past tense. The most common way is to simply add an ed to the end of the verb. Like with talk and talked, walk and walked, and stalk and stalked. But what about with go and went? That's suppletion, meaning the words go and went used to be totally unrelated and only the past tense of one was retained. Whoa, that's really intense. And we can use combinations of these methods to form past tense verbs or like with the word put. We do nothing. Does that make sense? That we use suppletion, ed endings, internal changes, sometimes a combination, and sometimes nothing to form past tense. Or is it nonsense?
Let's recap our main points about tense. Number 1, tense determines the physical form of the verb. Number 2, the tensed word comes directly after the subject. Number 3, there are only 2 tenses in English, present and past. Number 4, modals and auxiliaries steal the tense. Number 5, participles indicate aspect, not tense. Number 6, past tense can usually be made by adding the ed suffix. Number 7, it can also be made through suppletion, internal change, a combination, or nothing.
And number 8, don't forget, tense versions of a verb are sometimes homonyms of other non-tense forms of the verb. Did you get all that? Did it make sense? Hopefully you now all understand tense.